the next best thing we have is duct tape. Right for the table up there. Yeah. Okay, have we got everybody here?
Well, Andrew, Andrew Stevens, who did our appraisal, is trying to get in and he's having connection problems.
Oh, hold on.
There he is. There he's coming. You have to admit him. There we go.
I did. And let me make sure we've got him unmuted. All right.
Okay, then yes, I'm ready to go.
Okay. So again, my name is Frank Jenner. I'm a staff attorney here with the County Attorney's Office. I'm not participating in this hearing. I'm just working on the administration part of the audio and video part of it, the technical elements of it. Just wanted to make sure everybody can hear okay. If you are having any issues, please raise your hand or just try to say what issues you're having, and we'll try to get those resolved.
Okay, we ready?
Yep,
Mr. New, you ready?
I am.
Okay, we'll convene for this hearing on property tax assessments. Let's go ahead and introduce everybody involved. Since you're first on the screen, Ms. Davis, how about introducing yourself?
I'm Megan Davis, Chief Deputy County Attorney, and my witness today is Michael Freshour with the Assessor's Office.
And Mr. New, since I've got your picture with your names at the bottom of it, I think I know who y'all are. You're the petitioner, and Mr. Stevens, you're the appraiser that worked with Mr. New.
Yes, sir.
Very good. Adam Fogelman is the county attorney, and he's clerking for me today. Let's go ahead, Mr. Clerk, if you would, swear in. I guess looks like we've got two witnesses, so if you'll swear them in for me, I'd appreciate it.
Please raise your right hand. I state your name.
I, David New,
Andrew Stevens.
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, gentlemen. You can put your hand down. And Mr. New, you're also going to be a witness. I'm sorry, I slipped my mind there for a minute that you're not the attorney in the case. You're the petitioner. So Mr. New, bring us to the point where you can begin and make your case to us, please.
Great. Well, first of all, I appreciate you seeing me today. I realize under these conditions it makes it somewhat difficult, but
everything's
had a little
difficult in
technology.
2020, Mr. New.
I'm sorry?
Everything in 2020 is difficult.
Fortunately, we have the technology to support it.
Yeah.
What I'd like you to do is refer to the documentation that I sent to you and specifically to statute ACA 26-26-1202, the very first bullet item on that. This is what I'm trying to prove, that each separate parcel of real property shall be valued at its true market value in money excluding the value of crops grown with Aaron. But that's what I'm saying is that today, I don't feel like I've got a proper valuation on my property, and I'm about to explain to you why. What I'd like you to get out now is the document, the Word document that I sent that outlined the history of the taxation changes on my property. It's titled, it's got my address at the very top, 14425. Does everybody have a copy of that? Looks like I'm getting some head nods, yes, so I'm assuming that that's the case.
We are.
Okay, great. You can see I actually built in 2012. Our first assessment was in 2013. And I started with a property valuation created by the county of $582,650, which was under the cost of construction, roughly $60,000, roughly $70,000. But I think that you see that in custom homes starting to build on parcels. And so that's where we started, $582,000. And I'm going to assume that everybody has at least previewed this, so I'm not going to go through the details of it, but I think you can see that valuation from the county assessed to my home has been pretty much all over the board ever since then. If you look from 2013 to 2020, it's ranged up to just over $1 million, or a 73% increase, down to $830,000, which represents about a 60% increase over the original cost of the assessment that was done in 2013. And it's gone up and down a number of times. The 2017 adjustment was a countywide appraisal. In this neighborhood, my entire neighborhood was assessed significantly larger numbers, which would be represented with the $1 million assessment that I had. And we entered, in fact, Andrew represented our neighborhood holistically as part of that adjustment request, and I was reassessed at $721,600. We were told at the time, because realistically I didn't really line up with that assessment, but we were told that it was a take all. Either everybody agreed to the assessment change or nobody agreed to the assessment change, and so I agreed holistically with the neighborhood to take the assessment changes that were recommended by the county as part of that appeal. So that's how I ended up with $721,600. In this year, which isn't even a full taxation change year for the county, I went to $840,000, which is a 16% increase over the negotiated settlement in 2017. And was told that there was a mathematical error in the initial calculation, which was corrected this year, causing the 16% increase. We met with the Board of Equalization 2 months ago. I don't know exactly when, but it was a couple months ago, and agreed to a slight reduction based on some of the heated and cooled space within the house, and ended up at $130,000, a $10,000 reduction, which isn't anywhere near where, in my opinion, I need to be. So I've got a number of key points I want to talk to. First is in the 8 years, the property has increased in assessed value of 43%. I would challenge you to find very many properties within the city of Little Rock that within the last 8 years has increased in assessed value 43%. That's an average of 6% a year. 2017 was a negotiated settlement we've already talked about. Off-cycle assessments in 2020 we've also talked about. But I pulled the assessments, and these are county assessments. These are not appraisals. These are not subjective. These are the parcels that the county has assessed these other parcels at, of my closest neighbors. I've got the one right across the street. I've got the one right across the street and just to the west. And then I've got the one beside me just to the west. And you can see the one across the street, that's one house west, which actually is the closest one of the three to a construction timeline similar to mine. It's built just a few years ahead of mine. Averages $153.94 a foot. The other two were built far more recently, within the last couple of years. One's at $166 a foot, one's at $171 a foot, all significantly lower than the $201 a foot I'm currently assessed at. And so it's obvious that the taxation that's assigned to my house isn't. Oh, did we lose the conference room?
I've still got you. Can you hear me?
Okay, I'm back. Okay, and so it's obvious that the taxation being assigned to my property isn't consistent with the other residences in my neighborhood on similar land in a similar neighborhood, even by the county. I want to talk about two additional things. One, the appraisal that Mr. Stevens did for me a few weeks ago prior to my appeal. Let him speak to what he did and how he did it, and share with share with this group his credentials, what he does for a living, and how he came up with the corresponding assessment. But I'd also like to note a house that's in this neighborhood that's for sale right now. And that's, I've got the parcel number listed, but it's 15301 Bellevue Drive. It's been for sale for roughly 90 days. It's currently priced at $729,000 or 49. I'm sorry, Andrew, what?
I think it's now been for sale for 6 months.
Okay. All right. That's been for sale for 6 months. And it's for sale for $729,000, which is $149.88 a foot, which coincidentally is roughly the cost per square foot that Mr. Stevens, well, we lost the conference room again. Yes, got you. All right, I keep
We're not
sorry.
losing you.
Oh, yeah? Okay, all right.
We can see you, we can hear you as you're talking, so skip maybe on that side and we'll just weather the storm, I guess.
Okay. Anyway, the house is for sale at the front part of the neighborhood, comparable to mine, roughly built roughly the same time. It's for sale for $149.88 a square foot and has not yet sold. It's been on the market for 6 months. And so if you look at the appraisal Andrew did several months ago, it was roughly the same per square foot. I think the square footage assessment for Mr. Stevens' appraisal was roughly 150 a foot. And so that's what I'm arguing, is that first, I'm not being assessed fairly in relation to peers within this group. I know the county is going to show you a number of residences outside of my neighborhood. And we can question what some of those assessments are as well. But I'm showing you data for houses in the neighborhood, already assessed by the county, and then one for sale within the neighborhood and what the retail value of that home is at best. So I'll turn it over to Andrew at this point so he can explain to you what he did, what he does for a living, what his credentials are, and how he did the appraisal on my house. Andrew?
All right. Thanks, David. Hope everyone's doing good today. I am a certified general appraiser in the state of Arkansas, which means I can do commercial, residential, just about anything in the state. But I primarily do residential and commercial property in the metro area. Mr. New contacted me after he was notified of his assessment increase to perform a standard fee appraisal to determine the estimated market value for his property. And I did that for him. I know y'all have a copy of the appraisal. I'm not going to get too far into the weeds in that, but it's Mr. New's property is unique. It's there's not a whole lot like that have sold in the past year. But when you're doing appraisal, you do the best as you can and you make adjustments where necessary. The comps that I used for Mr. New's house, there was one sale in the neighborhood. That's comp 1. It was what I consider to be the most like it. The argument against that sale is that it wasn't on the open market, but it was listed by the Central Arkansas Realtors Association, which they entered their stuff in on Carmel's or MLS as a sale, and so I used it as a comp. The other comparables are all mountaintop and or in private gated communities in West Little Rock, and that would attract the same buyer that would be looking at Mr. New's neighborhood. The major adjustments to sales 2 through 4, I would say, is any kind of land adjustment. Sale 2, Stilette, is in Chenal Downs off of Canis Road. Sale 3, Bell Point, is in a neighborhood just south of Hillsboro in West Little Rock. Sale 4 is in Waterview Meadows which is a gated private neighborhood out in Roland off of Highway 300. Also listed as my cell 5 in this report is the listing, which Mr. Dew referred to earlier in his neighborhood. It's currently listed at $729,000 and made all the appropriate adjustments to that one. It is, worth noting that the listing in Mr. New's neighborhood is, about 800 square feet more than his house, and it is listed at $729,000. Other than that, after making my adjustments, I came out to a estimated market value for Mr. New's house of $650,000. He touched on the point that while it was assessed lower than what he built, but in any kind of custom home build, property owners typically spend more than what they could turn around and sell it for. But do you guys have any questions for me?
Yeah, I do, and you probably know this information. So what was the cost of the build and the lot?
The lot was originally $185,000. The total cost of construction was $660,000, including the lot.
So the lot and the improvements was $660,000, give or take.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Y'all ready for me?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead? I'm thinking.
Okay. I've got a couple questions for both Mr. Stevens and Mr. New.
Okay, I'm leaning forward because I feel like I need to. I'm trying to hear you.
That's okay. So are you all ready to take questions? Does that complete
Sure.
your presentation, Mr. New?
Sure.
Okay.
All right, my first question is for Mr. New. Just to be clear, we have this appraisal for $650,000. Is that the value that you're asserting as true and correct?
I am.
Okay, wanted to confirm that. You list the comparable properties, the three closest neighbors in your the Word document you presented here. And we also have your appraiser saying that your property is unique. So I'm curious as to, are there differences between the houses that you're comparing to and yours? Are they different stories? Do they have pools? Are they different structural layouts? What are the differences between those properties and yours?
Yeah, all the property in my neighborhood is unique. They're all custom built, which is what you typically see in a neighborhood like this. But no, as far as materials and workmanship, my house is very comparable to the three around me. In fact, one thing that I didn't mention, but is probably relevant to this discussion, is the lot value themselves. If you look at the cost of the land, it varies a lot within this neighborhood because of the view. Some lots have a view, some lots don't. Typically, houses and lots on the north side of the subdivision have views. The houses on the south side of the subdivision don't, at least river views. We've got valley views on the south side. And so the houses on the north side, on the north side of the streets, which would be the house across the street and down the street, have better views. And so those lots sold at higher values than the lots on the south side of the street. And so that's one of the things that's a factor in this equation, that it's a typical subdivision where all the houses are priced on lots that are of similar cost. The lots across the street were closer to $300,000 original purchase price. The lots on this side of the street were roughly $200,000 original purchase price. And so, if you look at the two across the street.
And Mr. New, I hate to be rude and interrupt you. I really just wanted you to answer that one question and not give you an opportunity to read testimony. So you're totally fine. Just to save us a little time. I've got some questions for Mr. Stevens about the appraisal itself.
Sure.
You mentioned that your comp one was not an open market sale. Can you elaborate on that? Is it typical to use sale transactions that aren't at arm's length in reliance for an appraisal?
I wouldn't say that it's not an open market transaction. It's not that it was, this sale would have been contracted between the buyer and the builder, and that is the amount that it then transferred for in the county records.
Okay, so do you typically try to use at arm's length transactions when you're pulling comparables for an appraisal?
I'm sorry, start that out again.
Do you typically try to use transactions that are at arm's length when you're doing comparables for an appraisal?
Yes, and that one is in my opinion, at arm's length, if it was between a purchaser and a contractor.
The other question I have, in the appraisal, I see there's a shop and you do an adjustment of $5,000 for that shop. Can we talk about that a little bit? Specifically, can you tell me about this shop? I'm looking at photos.
Sure. If you look on the sketch, there's a detached garage and living space, and part of that living space, no, excuse me, not part of the living space, there is a heated and cooled shop. Now, it does not have the same interior finish as any of the other living space in the residence. It is worth noting now that the county did have that shop included in their heated and cooled square footage, and you would not, no appraiser would consider that heated and cooled square footage in a.
In fact, the Board of Equalization adjustment that was made a couple months ago was specific to the square footage associated with that shop. So the $10,000 reduction that they agreed to a couple of months ago was an agreement with the shop being different material.
I think that's all the questions I have for y'all, and I'm ready to move on unless you want to redirect or y'all have questions.
I don't. Will I have an opportunity to ask questions once the county presents their argument?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Are y'all ready for Michael to get started?
I'm not.
And Mr. Stevens, do you mind while Ms. Davidson is testifying if I mute your microphone?
Go right ahead.
Okay.
You can do the same for mine if you need to.
So I don't see the shed, this shop. It's got a carriage house. So this whole thing? No, just the workshop. So just the workshop. 14 feet by 16 feet?
230. Is it the 230 square foot area?
Yes,
It is. Yeah, it is. 14 by 16.
All right, so it's just that little square of this appendage, I guess I'll call
Yes.
it. Okay, thank you.
Yes. The other living space is same materials as the rest of the house.
Okay. Ms. Davis, you can go ahead.
All right, if you can unmute Michael, we'll get started. All right, Michael, are you going to share your screen for these? Or first, Michael, introduce yourself and tell us your qualifications and where you work. Let's start there.
Hello, my name is Mike Brushauer. I work for the Pulaski County Assessor's Office. I'm the acting reappraisal director as it stands right now. I am a appraisal manager through the Arkansas Assessment Coordination Department, and I hold a residential evaluation specialist designation through the International Association of Assessing Officers.
Great. Okay, and we've got, everyone I think has a copy of this. I sent it out. It's a short presentation that the assessor's office has put together. It starts with parcel information is written on the first page with a photo.
All right, so I do not believe that I was put in a position where I'm capable of screen sharing this, but if everybody's got a copy of it, I can kind of discuss it as we go forward. So this was the original board presentation. As you can see, the parcel information was listed all across the front here on that first parcel, or that first page called parcel information. It discusses the property, the parcel number, what the previous values were, and what the current value is, and then the assessor's office recommendation. Second page of that is the front of the property record card, where we would have discussed the current appraised value, which is $849,280, I believe. Looking at it, I'm working on a laptop screen, so that's a little small. 260. That's $20 off, and that's with the land value listed on the front there of, I believe, $198,030. And the next page is the back of that property record card, which we'll discuss at length here a little bit later as we discuss the equitable neighboring properties to the subject. Everybody with me so far? So the way that this was presented to the Board of Equalization to prove the values that we currently have there, the final page in that workup is the sales comparable. And let me actually blow this up so that I can read it here. So that first set of rows for the sales comparable was presented to show that the cells used inside of the neighborhood level for improved property valuation for his neighborhood came up with a range of $80 to $157 per square foot, a median of 109, and an average of 112. These properties are located in Candlewood because, as has been stated before, the properties that are actually in Beauview are in the Beauview Estates unrecorded subdivision. He's absolutely right. They are unique properties and they don't typically sell. So we've got to use the best information and data that we have, and these were the grade 3s inside of the neighborhood that we were capable of using. But they have substantially lower lot values, they're older properties, and they have more depreciation. So as you can see off to the right side of that first row there, I have a land adjustment for these properties, and that's if these improvements were to be sitting on the subject's lot. As you break that down, you remove the Candlewood subdivision's land, you have the sales price less land, you add in the subject's land value for an adjusted sales price, and then that adjusted square foot price, which gives us a range of 112 to 209, with a median of 160 a square foot and an average of 156. But again, as I stated, these properties are older with more depreciation. As you can see from the very bottom line of this, the subject is a 2012 built with a 97% remaining economic life. What we're looking at in the rest of this neighborhood that we actually have cells on are more 1970s and 80s builds with mid 70s to mid 80s remaining economic lives on them. So that puts our value of $204,000 on the subject property inside of the range of these adjusted sales, but above the median and the average, which would be expected seeing as we're reviewing older properties with more depreciation. As we look at that second section of just above the subject, those are the 2020 sales. We can't actually use these in the valuation process, but we can list them as reference. And again, this is properties inside of Candlewood that the land has been adjusted on to more accurately reflect the subject property. And we have a range of 167 to 177 with a matching median and average of 172. So we are outside of that range on the high end. We can see that it looks like the sales out there are trending downwards as time moves forward, but it matches with everything else that the county was valued with in the 12 through 17 and 12 through 16 sales for the 17 valuation cycle. So the appraisal puts the property at $165 a foot, if I'm not mistaken. I believe he said 158 in that last post, and I'm not positive about that. But the appraisal at the assessor square footage, removing the shop, puts that value at $158 a foot. So it still falls inside that range, but it falls inside that range, matching more with 1970s, more depreciated properties. And that's the last page for the workup. Should I move to the appraisal?
Yes, let's talk about the appraisal for just a minute. First, let's talk about those comparable sales, particularly comparable sale 1. And we talked a little bit about not on open market and at arm's length. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yes, ma'am. So arm's length transactions are typically purchases between informed buyers and sellers with typical market exposure, with no odd financing, no personal property included. It is the market transaction of real estate between two people that are informed about what they are buying and selling, attempting to get the best deals for themselves. So we had kicked out the 130 Beauview Terrace sale that's listed in the appraisal as being non-arm's length transaction, had no market exposure, and it is listed on MLS, but it's listed on MLS with the market time marking of sold before listing. Now that property actually came to the Board of Equalization, and they had turned in an appraisal on the property, and after discussion with the taxpayer at the board, the taxpayer accepted a value of $890,000 on that comparable property. We don't find that to be an arm's length transaction that we're looking at inside of this appraisal.
And how does using a non-arm length transaction affect the value from an appraisal?
Well, you would put different weight on different comparable properties inside of the appraisal. So a portion of the weight of the value, the opinion of value for $650,000 is dedicated to comp 1 inside of this appraisal, which we don't believe to be a valid transaction.
Throwing out comp 1 for not being a valid transaction would change this value that's in this appraisal?
Yes, ma'am.
Andrew has a question.
What would you like to know? What it would change it to?
Can we
I'll take
wait
it out.
until after I'm done with my part?
Yeah, Mr. Stevens, hang on and hold
Sure.
the thought. We're coming back.
All right, Michael, there was also, I brought up earlier that the shop building and that $5,000 adjustment. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, ma'am. So they're correct. The Board of Equalization made the value decrease decision based off of what is being referred to as shop by the appraisal and as heated and cooled living by the assessor's office. So $5,000 adjustment has been made as if this 230 square feet of the house or a shop. This is not a utility building that somebody ran a cable to a window unit. This is heated and cooled, finished square footage. There are images of this in the back of the appraisal. Once you scroll through all the images, the actual photos of the house, you'll then scroll through the photos of the carriage house, then the photos of the carriage house garage. And finally, if I'm not mistaken, will be the images of the shop. This is heated and cooled square footage. It has finished drywall, finished flooring, finished ceilings. It's got paneling, or it's got floorboards around the walls. I'm sorry, I can't remember what they're called, honestly. It doesn't have crown molding.
Baseboard.
Thank you. Baseboards. It doesn't have crown molding like the interior of the houses. It is not of the same quality of the houses, but this is not just a utility building that you would find in somebody's backyard. Now,
Mike, do you think that the $5,000 adjustment made in the petitioner's appraisal is an appropriate adjustment for a shop of this type?
I do not.
And what would be a more appropriate adjustment in your opinion, and why?
Without actually breaking that down in our CAMA system, I couldn't just give you a number right off the top of my head without reviewing it. But realistically, the way that heated and cooled square footage Pulaski County is valued, the best case scenario would be decreasing that portion to a different quality of construction of living. That would be the only way to remain fair and equitable across the county, to take heated and cooled finished square footage that is considered living everywhere else in the county and adjust it for the quality of construction, not calling it something completely different.
Okay, and then there's a bit of a discrepancy between the land value in this appraisal and the land value that the assessor has put on the property. Could you discuss those differences a bit?
So we have the $198,000, which is, I believe, the residential acreage of $34,500 per acre on all the properties inside of this subdivision. And I believe that the appraisal refers to the property value as soon as I can find it on this little laptop screen. Give me just a moment. I'm going to have to blow this up on my screen real quick. I'm not seeing it on here, but I know it is included in the appraisal. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it was $206,000 for the land itself, which comes in higher than the value that we have, which shows me that the value deficit would be in the improvement only.
Okay. So that results in, because the land is valued higher, then it's lowering the value of the improvement. Based on this appraisal, and we've talked through a sales comparable you don't think is accurate, this shop building price you don't think is reflected, do you think $650,000 is the true and correct value based on what you've seen?
I do not.
And I think that's all we have. If y'all want to let them have questions.
Okay, let me come back. Mr. Stevens had a question or comment that he wanted to make earlier. We asked him to wait. So, Mr. Stevens, do you want to address the item that you were wanting?
Sure, yeah. We ran into this problem in the first appeal. Even if you take sales comparable number one out and you redistribute the weight, the rest of the comparables based on net and gross adjustments, your appraised value actually goes down to $646,645 or $650, however you want to round it, but it does not change the estimated market value of the subject property, in my opinion. In regards to the shop, whether it is, I go off of, this is what the appraisers do. You go off of market data that you can extract from the marketplace. Now, I do know that has some value, but as far as extracting what a typical buyer and seller is going to pay for that, an existing shop, whether it be attached or detached in the marketplace, it's hard to find. Sorry. I do know that how much it costs to put that shop in is not what someone's going to pay in a transaction.
I have a follow-up for Michael if Mr. New doesn't have any questions.
I do have some questions.
Wait a minute. Let's take one item at a time. Do you have a question for Michael in regards to what Mr. Stevens just said?
No, I have a different
Okay.
follow-up. Mr. New can go ahead. I'm sorry.
Now, I have a different follow-up as well. I don't have any question about the shop. I stand by Mr. Stevens' opinion on it, though.
Okay. And so, Mr. New, you don't have any questions, anything we just talked about, and you're standing by to give your closing. Is that correct?
I've got some questions for Michael.
Okay, then you can go ahead.
Okay. Michael, I'm looking at the documents that you provided for us to review and the ones you walked through as part of this. And I'm looking at the sales comparables that you used out of Candlewood, and while you got it listed as the same subdivision as Bowview, it's not. And so it, in my opinion, isn't as comparable as ones within the subdivision, but that notwithstanding, the lot values that you've got associated with those parcels, how did you come up with those values?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the last part of the question? The what that I have associated with those values?
The land values. If you look at the 5 houses, one is 21,390, 27,255, 23,115, 21,390, and 22,080. How did you come up with those lot values?
Those are the lot values of those properties in the Candlewood subdivision and the assessment.
Right. How did you calculate that?
Those were calculated. So the valuation process in Pulaski County for mass appraisal is land valued as if vacant is your first step. The second step is going to be the factoring of improved property at a neighborhood level. So just to step back for a second here, I'm not stating that unrecorded in the Candlewood are in the same subdivision. I'm stating that those are 2 subdivisions inside of the same neighborhood. That is the neighborhood boundaries that have been stated by Pulaski County before this valuation process began. Now, along with that, all land in Pulaski County is valued as if they subdivision level is the first step of the valuation process. So the Candlewood subdivision would have been valued based on sales inside of the Candlewood subdivision or comped with the closest comparable land to total ratios from surrounding subdivisions inside of that neighborhood.
Okay, well, that doesn't completely answer my question, but is it fair to assume that the lots that those houses are sitting on in Candlewood have an intrinsic value of roughly $20,000?
Thereabout, based on the land sales that I provided, yes, sir.
Okay, and just for the board's information, all of those houses that he's got in here as comparables are Riverview lots in Candlewood that likely would sell in upwards of $100,000 just for the land. So just so you know, I think that land value that he's got associated with those properties are not reflective of the land value that those houses are sitting on. And so if you put an appropriate land value on it and subtracted that from the total cost of the sale from that house, it makes the improvements far more in line with what mine is. Additionally, if you put an appropriate land value on those assessments, then the adjustment to mine becomes far lower than it is in his example. What I did, just for rough numbers, is put an $80,000 land value for each one of those, which is still a fraction of a $200,000 land value for mine, because I do have a bigger lot. I'll give him that. But if you put an $80,000 land value on it, it brings the average cost per square foot down almost exactly in the $150 square foot range that we're assuming that my property is in. So I'd like to testify to that. The other thing that I wanted to ask about, we talked about the shop a little bit. Can you tell me about the $10,000 adjustment the city or the county decided to make and the Board of Equalization for that space? What was that based on?
That was a Board of Equalization decision on that property value. Okay. We ballparked, if we were to put that on as that 230 square feet at a grade 4 quality, it would have come in somewhere right around $10,000 if I'm not mistaken. Okay.
My last question is the 3 neighborhood houses that I have listed in my original document, the one across the street from me and the 2 beside me. How can you explain the county assessment valuations for those 3 properties being anywhere from 1/3 to 20% lower than mine? Can you explain that?
Am I able to just start answering this question?
I would love an answer to this question.
Go right ahead, Michael.
Okay, so let me pull that back up here, and just so that I can actually review what we're looking at here in just a moment. All right, so we have the 3 properties that are neighboring properties to yours. So There's a lot of things that goes into the property valuation, especially the cost calculator. So if everybody could review the property record card that I provided in my initial presentation, the one that was for the Board of Equalization, what you'll be reviewing is labeled as property record card back. And then let me blow this up so that I can actually see that. So over on the right side of this property record card, you see building computation. So at a base grade 3, to the best of my knowledge, this cost calculator is calculating a perimeter to area ratio applied to that basic grade, which gives us a base price of $30.75 on the subject property. This is the subject properties that we are discussing. Was not able to supply the property record cards for every one of the properties in question on the sheet that was supplied by Mr. New, but I will use this to kind of explain what's going on.
Well, I hate to interrupt you, Michael, but you're not answering my question. I think we all understand how you calculated the valuation for my home. What we don't understand is how that same valuation was applied to these other 3 properties, which are similar in materials, they're similar in lot cost, but yet they're as much as a third less in assessed valuation by the county. This isn't a subjective assessment that an appraiser did. These are assessments by the county. And so it should have been the same process for all 4 houses. So explain to me how there's that much variance in 3 similarly built houses in the exact same neighborhood done by the county.
Yes, sir. And that is what I am attempting to do. This is not a yes or no question. And you're going to have to give me adequate time to actually explain that. So as you can see on the subject property, the base price is $30.75. If we were to review the property record cards of the 3 properties that are being referred to as comparable by Mr. New, they would have different base prices. That base price is for a grade in the perimeter of this exact improvement. The next step of that process is a grade adjustment factor, which would not take place here because it's a grade 3 and that base price is based off of the property being a grade 3, like the 3 comparable properties. After that, you have a grade plus and minus factor, which in the subject's case is a 1.15. That is based on what you see underneath the basic grade column on the left side of the sketch directly above it. That is where it has a plus 15 for being somewhat better quality than the typical 3. So the first thing that's different about those properties is the fact that this is a plus 15 and the others may or may not be plus 15s. So you would have an adjustment there. The next factor is the story height factor. The subject is a single story. As you can see in the story height on the left side next to the grade column, we are showing the story height as 1 story, and to the best of my knowledge, it is 1 story. The comparables that have been provided are either 1 pluses or 2 stories. In the cost calculator, the story height factor is decreased for multiple floors. So those properties would have received a downward adjustment. The next thing is the composite factor. That is the grade adjustment factor and the story height factors being put together for a factor that's actually applied to that base price. In this case, yours has gone from 30.75 multiplied by 1.15 to become an adjusted per square foot price of $35.36. That's due to the grade plus or minus of 15% on the subject property. That, of course, would be a different base rate adjusted per square foot price for those comparable properties. So that is then multiplied by the base value, or that is then multiplied by the square footage to produce the base value. The next step in that process is to adjust to base. We take that cost calculator in our CAMA system, takes that base value and adjusts for what are called structural elements. That is your exterior walls, heat and air, foundation, floor covering, floor structure, roof type, plumbing, roof cover, insulation. Everything that's over in the columns on the far left side of the back of this property record card. Once those adjustments are made, the additive items are added to that value. So once you have all of your additive items, which are carports, garages, porches, screened-in porches, wood decks, that's kind of the second to last column on the far right side of the property record card. All of that's added in. That then gives you a replacement cost new value, in this case of the subject of $205,791. On all those properties that are being referenced by Mr. New is comparable to this, that replacement cost new is going to be different on every one of those properties. Is then multiplied by that depreciation as a percentage. So the replacement cost new on the subject is being multiplied by 0.97. It is being multiplied by 3 different depreciation percents or remaining economic life percent on those comparables. It then gives you a replacement cost new less depreciation. As you can see in the case of the subject, $199,617. Then the location factor is applied. The location factor is what is found in the market for improved property at the neighborhood level by grade. This is done to every grade 3 in Pulaski County. That trends it up to as far as the improvement goes. So you have what is actually the value of the improvement, but since our CAMA system is using older cost manuals for this calculation, it is then trended with the location factor that is applied to all of the improved property of the same basic grade at the neighborhood level to trend them to market. Then you have your adjusted value. You add in the total OBYIs, which is yard and other improvements, which is the bottom center column, and that gives you your final value of that property as long as there are no further adjustments in that adjustment factor line, which could be for all sorts of things depending on what's taking place with the value of properties inside of a certain neighborhood. So if you come in as a 1-story with a higher base price for perimeter and area, and then you get adjusted up 1.15%, and then the adjustments to base for all of the specific structural elements that are tied to your house and no one else's, then we add in the additive items, which are possibly higher or lower than the comparable properties being referred to. Then we multiply all that by the depreciation on the property, which is different between all of those other properties. Then we multiply that by the location factor for the entirety of the neighborhood. Then we add in the OBYIs that are different across all comparable properties, and you end up with different property values that were all trended to market the same for equitability inside of the county.
Okay, and Michael, I appreciate that, and you did a great job explaining how you came up with my property value, but you didn't do a job at all at identifying how the other properties. And I get that you don't have that information with you, but I'll contest that everything in this entire list, with the exception of 1-story versus 2, is comparable between these 4 properties. In addition, 2 of them were built within the last 2 years, and so they're far newer than mine and the first property I have listed. And so I would argue that while your math,
I'm gonna object here. This is not a question to the witness. This is just testimony, and if we're gonna do that, we do that at the end.
well, I was coming to a question, but okay.
That a question's fine.
Your objection is so noted.
Thank you.
Mr. New, I think I understand where you're going, but remember that you do have a closing that you're going to be allowed.
Okay.
But you may not want to do that twice.
Okay, I'm done then.
Okay, are you sure?
I am.
Okay.
Now,
Looks like Andrew has a question.
am I able to finish my statement, seeing as I was interrupted with a question by Mr. New about the comparable property information he supplied? Or
how much longer do you have of a response? Just because I feel like we're getting close to time.
I can make it a couple minutes, or I could not add it. It's 6 1/2 of another. If we're getting close up on time, that's fine. We can move forward.
Very short.
Yeah, we got 3 minutes, so.
And so, Michael, then, so we're going to move forward from there. Mr. Stevens, did you have a comment you wanted to make?
Yeah, I had a question for Mr. Freshour. He mentioned you're using old cost data, and I was curious to see what the date on that cost data is, and or the coefficient of dispersion on the data that you used.
I don't have that information with me here currently.
Okay, I was curious to see how old the cost data is, because that is important.
And that is true. That's why we do the market trends. And I can tell you that the coefficients of dispersions are below 15% for state compliance, as far as the statistical testing goes.
But you don't know how old the COSPAT is, what the actual date is.
No, sir.
Okay, so it could be, 25 years old.
I believe that it's 90s, but I'm not positive about that.
Okay, I understand you got that.
That'd be 25 years. Nice.
Yeah.
And I have one objection I'd like to get on the record just to be thorough. I haven't had a chance to thoroughly research this, but I'm going to object to a pro se litigant representing a trust. Because I
don't know what that means.
Represented by an attorney. You are not representing yourself. You're representing property owned by a trust, which is a legal entity. And so my objection is to you doing that pro se without hiring an attorney to do so. I know there's law on the books that requires a corporation to have an attorney. I haven't had a chance to thoroughly research this, so I'd like to just get my objection on the record.
And it's on the record, and we'll forward. So let me go back to where you were. Mr. New was completed his rebuttal.
So he's entitled to close this one.
So and you finished. So Mr. New, now's your turn to go ahead and close.
Okay, I appreciate it. And I apologize for trying to close earlier.
Mr. New, you don't owe an apology at all. I want you to have your chance to be fully heard.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I really believe that the county has done an inadequate job of assessing the value of my specific property and instead categorize mine in a larger group and without looking at the individual factors associated with the unique nature of the properties within the subdivision. I think comparisons with Candlewood are ineffective because they're not located in comparable sites. I think the fact that they have such inconsistent results within my neighborhood is reflective of the fact that they've done a poor job of assessing value on houses in this neighborhood and instead have used generics in the calculations. I mean, you don't have to look any farther than these four to see the inconsistencies, but I can promise you there's 20 more just like it in this neighborhood all over the board, which was one of the reasons in 2017 we collectively argued that our subdivision had been overvalued. And you can see the $1 million assessment that mine was assigned initially is reflective of the fact that proper homework wasn't done in the valuation of properties in the subdivision. As far as the Candlewood comparisons that they have, I don't think any of them applies unless you're getting comparables on similar property of similar size. It's apples and oranges, and assigning such a low land value to those inaccurately defined where that was going to land for mine and negatively assessed mine based on the value of the property added to it. So I think I've done an effective job, Andrew and I've done an effective job explaining why my property is worth what it is. Certainly the house for sale in the subdivision should give a great indication of what property in this subdivision is worth and what it sells for. But my main point is that the county has just been ineffective at looking individually at the houses in the subdivision to determine their value. And we're trying to show it to them, and they're refusing to listen. So that's my point.
Thank you, Mr. New, and Ms. Davis, you have an opportunity to now close.
All right, I'll be brief because I know we're short on time. Just to remind the court that the burden of proof is on the petitioner in this case, and the assessor's value is not the one at issue. It is the petitioner's asserted value that is the one at issue per Art Code annotated 2627-318. The burden of proof to prove by preponderance of the evidence is on the petitioner for their true and correct value they assert. We've heard a lot of things to try to make the assessor's value look incorrect, and yet the assessor's witness was able to talk through the comparables and say why those offered by the petitioner were different and go through that. They were able to offer testimony as to why their candlewood were appropriate comparables, but in the end, it's the $650,000 value that is the issue and not the assessor's. The assessor's witness walked through that appraisal for the court, pointing out issues with unreliable sales comparables, with the adjustment for the shop, and other issues with the appraisal that I think shows the court that the petitioner has not met their burden of proof.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Thank you, Mr. Freshour, for giving us your time. Mr. New, I appreciate it. I hope you feel like you've had plenty of time to try and explain your concerns. I'm going to ask the both of you, Mr. New as well as Ms. Davis, to summarize your case and your final comments in a document not to exceed 1 page and a reasonable font to read, and submit that to me. Let's give you 2 weeks to get that in, and then within 2 weeks, I will give you my ruling on this case. Does that make sense to you, Mr. New?
It does. That's fair. And where do I send it?
To the email that I believe you've already, the BOE appeals 2020, or BOE appeal 2020 at PulaskiCounty.net.
Okay.
And also provide, you can, or you can email Doug, that will.
You have my email, Mr. New, you can email me.
Who is this? I can't.
Doug Dalporto?
I'm sorry?
Doug Dalporto, you emailed me yesterday.
I do.
CC me.
Okay, I'll do it.
And Mr. New, do you have a pencil handy?
Certainly.
My office number is 340-8305.
Got it.
And if you have a problem getting that document to us, we'll assist you in getting it to us, getting it into the file is, through whatever means necessary. Any other questions? Again, thank you all, and I appreciate you taking the time to try and give me your views and give me all the facts. We're adjourned.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for your time.
I believe these were yours.
Yeah, thank you.
I wanted to, I was afraid I was in the category of don't answer the question if you don't know the answer.